Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamours have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them. Hi, Janelle.
Hey, Andrea. So good to see you. I've missed you.
It is so good to see you too. It's been a while. We've been apart for a while.
More than 2 weeks.
Yeah, and guess where Janelle was?
I was at Burning Man, my favorite place.
I saw the headlines and I was like, oh my God, is my friend okay?
Yeah, it's really remarkable to have gotten feedback or reach out to people's concern. And it's just being my own confusion of the whole thing. The news made it into this big disaster. But, ultimately for me, Burning Man has been hugely impactful for me. And one of the ways is that it's designed to put you in a harsh environment to see what you're made of. And every year it meets you wherever you're at. And this is my 8th burn. And I burned a totally different way. I was just in an RV. I wasn't in a camp. But the whole point of anyone going to Burning Man is you're going to the desert, and self-reliance is one of the principles, meaning you bring in all of your water, all of your food, all of your fuel, everything that you need. So, and what you don't have is electricity, right? And internet, and you're designed to survive. There are porta potties and there are other ways things are being supported. The porta potties are the thing that the city provides, the temporary city provides, to ensure the health of the desert.
But that's the only infrastructure, right? There are no vendors. There's nothing, right?
Nothing. So the rains came, and in the desert, this particular soil is the type of soil that it gets very sticky. So if you try to walk in it, your shoes get sucked off your feet. If you try to bike in it, it just sticks to the tires, and the tires then can't spin. If you try to drive in it, the same thing. It fills the wheel well with mud. And so then you get stuck.
This is called the playa.
This is called the playa, and it's just the type of soil that is there. I'm sure it has rained during Burning Man at some point in the past, but not in any recent decade has it rained during the week of Burning Man the amount that it did. And last year, we had hotter weather and hotter and bigger winds than we had had in a really long time. And that was last year's extreme thing. So this year it was rain, but again, we all have all the food and water and fuel and everything that we need, technically, if you've planned it from the burner mentality appropriately. So that was just this year's challenge. So there's a whole experience of those of us who were prepared, then we were fine. We weren't planning on leaving anyway. And then we were able to support the people who weren't prepared. But ironically, I had planned to leave on Tuesday morning. I left on Tuesday at noon. I planned to get home last night and drop the RV off today. That happened. All that happened. The thing that got delayed was the days that they burned the man and the temple. But in my point of view, it was Burning Man, and it was epically beautiful.
Well, when I read the New York Times headline, literally I'm in my bed. My husband's sitting next to me. He's like, oh my God, did you see what's going on at Burning Man? And I was like, what? What do you mean? And he shows me the picture. And then I see this satellite picture of Burning Man in this, it's in this rainbow shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I've never seen before.
You've never seen it?
No. I have no idea. I'm like, how are they doing that so perfectly? Actually, we're getting too much into Burning Man.
Yeah, we'll do a whole episode at some podcast on it.
Yeah, but I was a little concerned. Of course, someone died. And so I didn't know, why are people dying? What's going on? And you don't find out about that till later. But I knew, of course, I'm like, well, if anyone can handle this, burners can. And really what I'm thinking is, if anyone can handle this, Janelle can. She's fine, right? I was not really worried about you.
Yeah.
But I reached out. Are you warm? Do you have food? Are you okay? You're like, yes, I'm fine. We have plenty of food. And I told you that I'm sure burn consumers can handle it. And I think you said something to the effect of, yes, everyone handles hardships differently and everyone's in a different position. Not everyone is in the magic. And that's understandable, right? We all have different suffering that triggers us in different ways.
Yeah, I mean that when the rain started, I was like, okay, there's still magic here. It's just that the expectation was that it was going to rain. But the magic doesn't go away just because something else happened. And so that got to be for this burn in particular, I really followed the energy, AKA followed the magic. And so I got to be like, okay, where is the magic here? And then where can I bring it is actually what I did in service to others, was bring magic when people were unsettled.
And I'll remind you that probably 2 or 3 years ago, I said, follow the magic. You're like, oh yeah, follow the magic. I'm like, that's on your WhatsApp. Post it under your WhatsApp picture. You're like, is it? It is? I forgot. Remember that?
Yes. My past self was like letting my future self know that it already knew what to do.
I love it. Okay. So glad to have you back.
Yes, I'm happy to be back. And also just want to give a shout out to those. There's many, many people who are still there, which is true every single year. Even though the Burning Man ends, it's usually 6 weeks to 2 months that people are there, volunteers, as well as some full-time Burning Man organization people who are there to like clean up the playa, take down the infrastructure they built, remove the porta potties. Like there's a tremendous amount of work, and the mud definitely made their jobs much, 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 much harder for the next 6 weeks. So I just want to give a shout out to them for continuing to do that.
Good idea. So today we're going to talk about the Magdalene Feminine Mysteries Retreat. This is something Janelle went to a few weeks ago. So Janelle and I share a calendar. I think I remember thinking, and sometimes, so I don't always look at what's going on in her calendar, but I can plan things for the both of us by just, popping on her bright orange color on my Google Calendar. And then it's like, oh my God, it's Halloween, because there's so much going on in her calendar. But I saw the word Finland and I'm like, what the fuck? Why is she going to Finland? Are you really going to Finland? So yeah, you went to Finland.
I went to Finland relatively spontaneously in the sense that I had gone to an ISTA retreat and then heard about this retreat, this next one coming up, and it was a month later. And I was like, I think I'm going to go. And then lo and behold, I was like, okay, I'm going. And then I literally bought my ticket 3 days before.
So what drew you to this particular retreat?
Okay. So this was Mary Magdalene Feminine Mysteries, put on by Winter Isley, who...
That's the name, a first name and a last name.
First name and
Winter
Isley.
Isley.
And she was one of the facilitators at the ISTA that I was at in Austin. And Mary Magdalene is an archetype that I have been following for a while. I was raised Catholic, and Mary Magdalene, as portrayed by the Bible, was a prostitute. Well, either portrayed by the Bible or portrayed by the Vatican, depending on what you're following, that she was a prostitute and that Jesus cleared her of 7 demons. That's how I was raised to think of her. There's more to the story, but this isn't about going into the history of her as much as me recognizing that although I'm not, and I have not been for a long time, a practicing Catholic, a few years ago, I read several books by the feminist theologian Megan Watterson. One was called Mary Magdalene Revealed. And that completely reframed everything that I was taught about the Catholic Church, or taught by the Catholic Church, about the Bible and about Mary Magdalene.
Okay, so let's just pause there. So growing up, did you read the Bible growing up? Actually, I need to ask you that. Let's go into that.
I did not. And I want you to know that my dad offered me $100 when I was in high school to read the Bible. And that was so much money. It was so much money. And I didn't do it.
You didn't take him up on it. Okay. All right. I think this is an interesting split, and because I was raised Catholic as well. Didn't go to church every Sunday, but definitely did all the things, CCD and confirmed and stuff. And never once did I pick up a Bible. Bible was just not part, like I knew it was related, but it was not part of my family's practice.
I would say in my family, so I did go to church every Sunday, and there were probably some Lent seasons, which is the season before Easter, that we would like reading the Bible was part of the experience. And my mom and dad were in a prayer group that met once a month and read the Bible. But my brother and I were not part of that prayer group.
Gotcha. So it's, yeah.
The Bible was definitely like next to my dad's armchair. Still is, always is very much part of.
I'm sorry, I have to divert. Did you give up something for Lent every year?
No.
No? That's actually, I think that like shows I'm like a mainstream Catholic, like, and you're like more of a devout, right? Like Lent is like, yeah, you give up something. I mean, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, of
like,
course. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That was, and that is what the joke, like one of the comedian Jim Gaffigan jokes about. He's like, you know, if you're Catholic, you don't eat fish and meat on Fridays, unless you forget. Because it's just not that strict.
Yeah, we were not that kind of strict.
So Mary Magdalene, though, growing up, did you have a really good idea of who Mary Magdalene was?
No, just that was
the name.
Just the name. And like I said, she's a prostitute. Jesus cleared her of 7 demons. I definitely had, like, I feel pretty good about my Spark Notes version of the Bible. Like I've got the Spark Notes or like the Cliff Notes.
What's a Spark Note?
I don't know, Zaya starts using that. Oh, it's the millennial term for Cliff Notes.
Oh my God. Okay, of course. Yeah, and to me, Mary Magdalene was like this mysterious other woman with red hair. But I don't even know if she has red hair, but that's how I picture her. And like as though she was Jesus' mistress or something. Like there was some shadow around it, but like almost felt like I wasn't supposed to talk about her.
Right. That is also true.
Okay.
Except for the red hair part. I do think that was she the mistress? Was she definitely in shadow? Definitely not. Like here was the Queen Mother, like Mother Mary on the high, and Mary Magdalene was like on the low.
Okay. I think I'm confusing it with Game of Thrones. So, so never mind. No red hair. Got it. Okay. So keep going. So you had this book, and that's what drew you to this retreat.
So I read Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Watterson, and that book actually like kind of blew me open in a way of like, oh my gosh, I was taught by the Catholic Church that the Bible was true. And then in reading this book, realizing that there are 4 gospels that were not included in the canon of the Bible. And the canon is there's all these stories, all these gospels in the Bible. Well, guess what? Someone got to choose those.
And they chose all the male-dominated ones.
Yes.
Shocking.
Right. And so it was this recognition of like, oh my God. Like a ruling class consciously chose the gospels that supported what they wanted people to believe and excluded the 4 gospels, one of which was written by Mary Magdalene, that speaks to basically having an experience with God, like a direct experience with God.
Oh my gosh, you're blowing my mind. Okay, I didn't even know this.
Yeah. So then the other book that I read, so I read Mary Magdalene Revealed 2.5 years ago, and that started me on this journey. And then in the past few months, I read another book called The Magdalene Manuscripts by Tom Kenyon and Judy Sion, and is a channeled book of their experience of Mary Magdalene coming to them and speaking through them. So that's its own interesting thing.
But another flavor of woo.
Another flavor of woo, for sure. But then Tom Kenyon is a preeminent scholar on alchemy, and he speaks to Egyptian alchemy and Mary Magdalene's role as an initiate in the Isis temple. And this whole book had a really a deep impact on me. And I guess I should speak to like, why does it have a deep impact on me? I think it was really part of this conditioning, right? Like the Catholic Church was such a deep part of the conditioning that I had. So these two books gave me a completely different perspective on what I thought was true with a capital T. And much like in my other flavors of woo, when I like feel into like reading these two books, it was like, oh, there is a truth in here that's true for me. And both of these books speak to having a direct relationship to the divine or to God within me. It doesn't have to be outsourced to a priest or to some other person.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. I just keep going. Finish your thought.
You know, why am I drawn to this? It's like, oh, like this is like what's under it all was these two books helped me find God within me. And so Mary Magdalene helped me find God within me.
Beautiful. This is just, yeah. This is very touching. So I just have a couple of reactions to that. One is that, oh, you're going back to your original childhood source and finding something deeper that was there all along, but you weren't shown, right? And I went through this journey when I went to Jerusalem and backpacked through the Middle East and I was in Jerusalem for Easter week and Holy Week, and eventually came to the conclusion that because everyone was fighting over the territorial, like, oh no, this is the place that Jesus did this. No, this is the place that Jesus did this. Like, it's very chaotic and it's very territorial, and it does not fill me with love and kindness. And I went to a Presbyterian service that morning and I was like bawling, and I was like, oh, this is my way out of Catholicism. I feel so free. I feel like people are singing. This is the way I want to feel. And I eventually blogged and posted and said, oh, Jesus might be all these places like Westminster Abbey and, Jerusalem and the Garden Tomb and all these places, except most of the time he's hanging out in my heart, dropping off the dry cleaning, going to get coffee, and then coming back home. But that was a big deal because I'd been taught that it was in all the other places. So you're basically describing proof that is what Mary Magdalene said, that we are the source.
And that's why she was included. Like, that is like the blasphemy, and why she was vilified as a quote unquote prostitute, because they were trying to demean her and her experience.
Her witchy experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think they went as far as witch, although that probably by definition is. I mean, basically anyone who claims to have direct experience of God, that might actually be the definition of a witch in some way.
Yeah. So let me ask you, do you like the idea, and I promise we'll get to that thing in Finland, but is there some kind of comfort that this idea is coming from Catholicism? Something that was so deep in you growing up and is still a part of you? What if this had come from a different lineage?
So what I feel to be inside of me is what I feel is inside all of us. Yeah. And the lineage just comes from the culture that we grew up in. And for some people it's different. Like Cat Stevens, right? He converted to a Muslim, right? So for whatever reason, it came to him through that route. And he obviously wasn't raised that way. That wasn't his lineage, right? In my case, I was raised Catholic, and it came through Mary Magdalene. So I don't think the lineage has to align, but it does seem not surprising that it aligns. Like I think what is comforting in my experience right now is that the feeling that I have in my heart isn't actually attached to anything. It's inside all of us. And so I don't actually care that that it's coming via Mary Magdalene. It's just that I would hope that everyone gets to feel that at some point. And I remember very specifically with my dad, You know, he always wanted me to like feel like what it was like. He wanted me to be saved and like feel the love of Jesus Christ. And what I now say, and I was able to say to him very recently, I was like, oh, I actually feel what she wanted me to feel. And it came a totally different way. So you were trying to teach me your way because that like you wanted me to feel this way. You're like, here's the way that it happens. And now I get, oh, this is the way. I feel this way. I feel it. And we all get to it a different way.
Yes. Okay. So I definitely believe all of that and what you just said, that you can get to it whatever way you want to get to it. And this is kind of big for me. I'm having like this mini awakening real time in that, you know, I just went to a funeral where I was in a Catholic church, and I'm hardly ever in a Catholic church anymore. And there was there's these just two opposing forces constantly when I'm sitting at this service, because I'm like, I don't believe this anymore. I don't believe this anymore. Like, this is not how I find a higher power, you know, and that's fine. I hear those voices and I'm like, that's fine. And then also deep within, I'm like, I belong here. I know when to stand up. I know when to sit down. I have the entire service is like a movie I have memorized.
Yes. Right. I could say all the words. I can't
sing up. We lift them up to the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord.
Right. It is right to give thanks and praise. Yeah, these are the lyrics I do know.
Right.
to this song. Yeah.
Right. So I know them so well. And then like when they go to communion, I'm like, oh, am I supposed to go? I don't believe anymore. I'm like, no, I'm part of the club. No, I'm in. I'm already totally in. Because Catholics might say like, oh, anyone can come to the church, but not everyone is supposed to take communion. Right. This is the rule I was taught. It's only the VIPs. So it's such conflicting forces. But so to me, this is a huge comfort, because I'm like, oh, it was there all along. Just like Dorothy and the way to get home. It was there all along. And it's comforting to me that I can go back to that same container, even though I have a different belief now, and find that.
Yes.
So anyway.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I didn't get this in the script notes. But I'm the script notes. We should call them spark notes now. You should tell him.
Yeah, and I think that this is like, this gets under so much of what it is that I'm doing, right? All these flavors of woo also led me here, right? I mean, this feeling, and it's just this feeling. What led me, when I heard about this retreat, which was for women only and focused on, you know, witchy magic and ritual, something inside me said yes. And I'm now like deeply listening to this voice inside me. And I was like, okay, I need to go. And I did.
And it's called a mystery school.
It's a mystery school. So I'll say a couple of things. ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts, which Andrew and I have mentioned many times, is also a mystery school. And I looked this up because I was like, I feel like this is a good thing for us to know. And the best definition I came up with that I found was, it's a school for the education of the soul. And the reason there is deep, deep history in mystery schools, especially in ancient Egypt and in different parts of the world. I'm not going to pretend to be the person to talk about those, but that it's this idea, part of like the mystery is, the way that I describe it, is you don't want to know about the rituals or the things that are happening there. Like, here's the curriculum, because every person's experience is individual. And like living through the experience and potentially like the surprise is part of the experience. But you and I both did ISTA. It's a mystery school for both of us. And you did a ritual and I did a ritual, and we both learned something different about ourselves. And thus that is the mystery. We are being exposed to the same thing and our experiences are different.
I'm going to call it a mystery school now. I think I'm going to call ISTA a mystery school.
It is a mystery school.
Yeah, I've never heard it referred to as that though.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. I think that totally makes sense. Yeah. Yes. And that's just a good way to frame it when people say, well, what's it like? What happens there? And I'm like, well, I don't want to tell them everything that happens or all the rituals.
Right, because all you're doing is telling your experience, and their experience gets to be totally different.
Exactly. And you go for one thing and you get something else typically too.
Yes. And there is again, like I said, it's a deep history of mystery schools in the human experience in cultures around the world.
Yeah. Is this also related to an oral tradition too of learning from speaking? Like, was it mostly said to you or no? Was it?
I don't know that the oral piece has anything to do with it. It might, but I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
I think embodied. The experience is an embodied experience, meaning you're not just sitting there in a classroom learning and like regurgitating information.
This comes from the Buddhist tradition. A lot of things they have to be passed down orally. And I was always sitting in the Buddhist classes being like, could you just like give me a whiteboard? Like, I really would like a handout, right? And they're like, no, there are no handouts and there are no whiteboards. That's the whole point. You're just taking it in. You're listening to it. And so the learning is an experience.
Right.
And that kind of makes sense that it's more embodied when you're not in your head writing down. So
it's possible that the oral aspect of it is part of a mystery school. Because when I think about it, none of these schools, we're not writing. There's no curriculum that we are like writing down and taking notes on per se. And in fact, they encourage you not to do that. But I don't think of it as an oral tradition because so much of the rituals that we did were like embodied in that they might be speaking, but we were feeling. Yeah. I think that we were like, there's so much feeling.
Got it. Okay. So paint me a picture of this retreat.
Okay.
What was the setting?
We were in Finland, about 2 hours north of Helsinki, in a landscape that So Finland, which is in one of the Scandinavian countries, has this beautiful farmland. It's surrounded by sea and farmland and then forests. So we were on what's called temple land, meaning that this land was bought, purchased, and used specifically for mystery schools and for retreats that were designed to elevate the soul. So it's very sacred in its intention, in its creation, its purpose. And so you drove through this very green, lush farmland to the forest. We drove in. There was this like old farmhouse that like from the outside, I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to be. It was a little, like it seemed to be like under construction, if you will. It was clearly an old farmhouse. But I was like, well, we'll see. But then we walk in and it was like, it was exquisite. It had been newly remodeled by the owner was an architect and an artist, and it was really exquisite. They just hadn't gotten to the outside yet. And so there was like these like really like incredible, like almost like gallery pieces of art and old exposed wood. And then the land itself was these like old trees, and there was the lake. I had the chance to go into a sauna because the Finnish have a sauna culture. So we would go into a wood sauna at night and then get to cold plunge in the sauna lake. But it was very quiet, like bright stars. And as it turned out, it was summertime in Finland. So it was 22 hours of daylight, only 2 hours of dusk in the middle of the night. And it actually rained quite a bit, which was unexpected.
And what was the temperature?
The temperature was colder than I expected. I would say it was in the 60s, like upper 60s.
And how many people were there?
There was 20 of us, including the facilitators.
Okay.
All women. From all over, there were several of us from Colorado, but it was all over Europe as well. And someone from Mexico. So
you mentioned to me that you were unprepared in a strange turn of events. Janelle was unprepared. Did not have the clothing you needed.
Yeah. So this is I had like one. I didn't like write this as one of my takeaways, but a really fascinating takeaway for me is that I actually was like thinking I was going to go into this, like to this entire experience, and I was going to learn how to like talk to spirits and maybe fight demons and like get a wand and like throw spells. And I really did think I was going to Hogwarts.
Just made a Harry Potter reference.
I did.
Good job.
I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And it turns out that I figured out like what my kryptonite is, that like totally can take me down, is if I don't have the right clothing for an experience. And it doesn't mean like, oh, I have to look great for the experience. It was that I didn't bring any long pants, jacket, or socks. Because I thought it was summer, and I had looked at the weather and it seemed like it was going to be like temperate. And there were a lot of mosquitoes in this land, and I think I had sneakers, but I didn't have like hiking boots. And so I really felt myself completely contract of like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to be getting bitten like by thousands of bugs, and I'm going to be cold. I don't like being cold. And that ended up being actually my hardest part of the entire week experience, was how to navigate that. And my friend, my dear, dear friend Touch, who was with me, she was like, you know, you could ask your best friend to borrow clothes. And she had laid out 17 pairs of warm socks, all these tights, extra jackets, because she runs really cold. And I was like, oh, can I borrow clothes? And so then I looked ridiculous the whole week. I mean, there was times that I would go out, I felt like a leprechaun with these my outfits didn't match at all, but I was warm and protected from bugs, and so I was fine. And it was a really big lesson, and it sounds superficial to me even to say it. And it was a recognition of like, oh, it basically put my inner and outer worlds out of alignment to not. It took me off center. And so it brought another level to my own awareness of how clothing for me is an outer expression of my inner state. And if they're out of alignment, then I'm out of alignment. And so being able to match the environment that I'm in, again, it's not about being like dressed amazingly, perfectly, like looking fancy and fabulous. It's like, oh no, do I have what I need to feel good?
And could you achieve that match then?
Yes. Once I got those clothes from her, right? Like a jacket that was too small, socks that didn't match, didn't matter, but I was warm and protected from the mosquitoes, then I was good. And then
you could come home
yes.
inside.
And then I was able to recenter.
It's just, there's something so ironic and hilarious about the fact that this was the biggest trigger and trouble for you on the trip, and you just got back from a mud-filled Burning Man.
Right, but I had all the clothes I needed. I was totally fine for Burning Man. Like I had what I needed, and even though it rained, I had shoes that laced up. I had garbage bags to put on my feet. I had the zip ties to put around the garbage bags.
So you were prepared. There's no
prepared.
bad weather, only bad gear.
Yes. In fact, I will just cause it's just really funny. I got so many compliments from people about how I looked during the mudstorm. They're like, you look great. I'm like, well, I'm still at Burning Man. I'm like, I didn't bring bad clothes. Right. I only have my good clothes to wear.
Yeah, and I wear them mud or no mud.
Or mud or no mud. I'm now just putting plastic bags on my feet.
Yeah.
So it was really funny. So anyway, so that was, and this is like that share about the clothing for me is why I do anything. It's like, oh, like, I don't know how many people in the world have the same experience with clothing that I do, but it doesn't matter. I just need to know, like, this is my own learned experience in a way that was part of the mystery of like, oh, having mosquitoes and it being cold helped me learn this about myself.
It's good. Discomfort leads to growth.
Okay.
So what are a couple of the takeaways from the mystery school in Finland?
A really big one is I'm calling letting go of form.
This is not new. You've been talking to me about this for a while, and I am also steeped in it.
So we did several rituals, every day we were gathering and doing different experiences, and we were doing a ritual regarding the light feminine. And the invitation was to step into the circle and to speak one of your deepest longings that you may never have given voice to. And in reflecting on that, I was like, oh, wow, I have never thought about that. And yet it was very clear to me what my deepest longing was, and that, oh yes, I had never given voice to it. So it was a really like vulnerable, like share for a lot of us. And I'll name what mine was, which was I had this longing to have, like, to make love with someone and to like fall through time and space with them, like transcend into something else. I've like read about this. I know it exists. I've heard about it. I've heard you talk about it. And I'm like, oh, it's a longing that I have. And as I even, say it out loud, it's like, oh, right. And will it ever happen? I don't know. So we all went around the circle sharing these longings. And then the facilitator invited us to just say, now just imagine you have an idea. You stated this longing. Now you've got a picture of this longing. Now, can you let go of what you think the fulfillment of that longing is supposed to look like? And could it possibly even happen? Allow yourself to think it could even happen this week in this environment. And so my first thought is, okay, I just said what I was going to say. It's not going to happen at a retreat with all women right here.
Way to go ahead and set those limitations, right?
And then in the next moment, I just like my eyes got wide open and I was like, oh, whoa. And I remembered that the night before we had done a ritual, and it was a ritual around expanding our heart to include ourselves, and then expand your heart and include the person in front of you. And we moved from person to person around it in a circle. And then, so you're sitting with one person and expand your heart to include all of them. And then you go to the next person and then expand your heart to include like beyond them, through the lands, into all of Europe, across the world. And then the next person, like you expand your heart to include all of that and like into the cosmos. And you're just expanding. And the last person I was with was my friend Touch. So she and I were sitting like on each other's laps. And she said, during the exercise, we put our heads together and we toned. So we made sound. So like we both like basically did an ohm together and leaned our heads against one another. And in doing that, the experience that I had was that we like disappeared, like our heads, like in the resonance, our heads disappeared and I fell through time and space. So fast forward to the next day, she's inviting us to do this. I'm like, okay, that's not going to happen. And then I realize, oh my gosh, it's actually already happened. It happened the night before with this woman that I love, sitting on her lap, resonating, intoning, and I fell through time and space and like disappeared. And it was profound. It really showed me how much I can attach, and I think all of us can, but I can attach to what something is supposed to look like. And then that attachment is what I'm missing. The moment is happening and I'm missing it. So that was one.
So letting go of form.
The other like example of it, which was really beautiful. This woman just spoke about her partnership, and she's in a beautiful relationship with a man who's much older than her. And she spoke about how, she was 40 when they met, and he was 60, but she was looking for a guy who was 40, who was really fit and liked to go to ecstatic dance and wanted to have a kid and like have a house. And then she met this person who'd already been married, didn't want to get married, didn't want to live together, had a long white beard, was a spiritual leader who like traveled the world. And she was like, no. That's not,
You're not the right person.
That's not but then like, as she was, deeply listening, and her soul kept saying, no, you're staying. And she's like, really? It's this here? Like, we're not going to live together? And and so like listening to her, I was like, oh, it was such a beautiful visual of like the more she trusted and let go, as she could lean in, and like more of her, like she felt more and more at home, but it just looked nothing like she thought it was going to look. And so the other piece for me that happened was in this idea of partnership, like what is partnership supposed to look like? And what do I think it's going to look like for me? And here I was in Finland for 2 weeks, traveling with Touch. We were together for every moment. We were sleeping in the same bed. We were like holding hands when we went to bed. And we were like making decisions together. And we were essentially in partnership. And then I knew that I was coming home for a couple of weeks. I was going to see you. And you and I essentially are in partnership for a big part of our lives together. And like, I was going to like lose the partnership with Touch for those, like the partnership was present with Touch. And then that was going to fall away, but then partnership was going to come back online with you. And then I was going to New York to be with Anastasia, and she and I were going to be together for 3 days. And then we were going to be intensely in partnership for 3 days. And it was like, oh, and then I have physical relations with men in my life. But it's like, I was like, oh, like if I say like, oh, I'm really longing for partnership because I'm not in partnership, quote unquote, right now, then I am missing that I'm actually in partnership most of the time, and it's really fulfilling. I feel very fulfilled with my life right now. And it's nothing about, oh, I don't want a man in my life. It's like nothing about that. It's about the feeling of doing life with someone I have. It also means there is room for someone else to come in and I can do life with, but it doesn't mean that it is the all-encompassing idea of what I have had in the past, where one person is necessary to fill all the needs. I'm actually being fulfilled by several different people because I'm partnering, quote unquote, in my life with many women and many people.
Wow. So I see this letting go of form just as a perfect, like Russian doll inside the bigger Russian doll of never mind social and cultural conditioning. Never mind the should. It doesn't have to look this particular way, right? Just like we've learned and we've talked about on this podcast, marriage, parenthood, best friendship, everything doesn't have to look a particular way. And we have to let go of the form that we think it's supposed to look like.
Right.
And I think I just want it for our listeners, like this letting go of form can stretch to many examples, right? And this is just about love and relationships, but this is like, okay, what does success look like to you, right? Mm-hmm. And you expect it to look a one way, and then it might come a different way.
Right. Or you realize that you're living someone else's definition of success, which is what I tell my marketing clients all the time.
Me too. I was going to say, this is totally what I was like, what does success look like for you? And they might think it's one thing and then be like, oh, no, this is actually success. I don't need an office, or I don't need, this many clients, because they have to wait and see what does success look like for them. So this idea of formlessness is really strong. And I think the other part of it that I want to touch on is I heard you say like that you were attached to what it was going to look like for you, right? Mm-hmm. In your head, when you described your greatest longing, mm-hmm. you're pretty attached to it looking like making love with a man, mm-hmm. right?
Right. Someone who I'm loving deeply, in partnership with.
Yes. Of course. And a few weeks ago, I had this experience. There's this little 2-minute, 3-minute experience where I was at Folk Fest and I was in line to get a drink and I wasn't really paying attention. I'd gotten distracted and I got up there and I said, I don't even know what you offer and I don't know what I want. And this guy just looked at me and he's like, whoa. He's like, stop, breathe, take a minute. And I was like, okay, thanks. And he's like, here's what we have. I was like, I don't know what to get. And he's like, I'm going to choose something for you. He gets me my drink. He gives it to me. I start to pay him. He's like, go away. It's like, don't even, whatever. And he's like, man, this is what the world needs. Read the fucking room. What needs to happen? What wants to happen? Like, that's what the world needs more of. And like what that really translates. So it was just like this beautiful piece of magic I've been living on for the last month. I don't even know what the guy's name was. But the idea is that we have this script in our hearts and in our minds. We have a script, we have an agenda, we have a plan, we have shoulds. And when we come into a new relationship, a new room, a new country, a new stage of life, we need to stop a minute and read the room and say, okay, what is actually going on here? And allow that formlessness to influence our next move. So it's all coming together so beautifully. I'm just gonna cry.
That was so beautiful. I just like felt like everything like slowed down in that moment. I can feel that person saying to you, take a deep breath, and I'm just like, okay.
God bless him. Love you, whoever you are. Formless. Okay.
So some other takeaways was I came away with a new mantra, which our brave hearts have heard me sing.
Yeah.
Yay. My one mantra. But we did another ritual, which was about coming up with a response to the voices in our heads that want to protect us, but in doing so, take us down. And these are like the negative voices that we have that tell us that we're not good enough, tell us that we're not capable, tell us that this thing is dangerous, tell us that, you're doing it wrong. I mean, any number of voices that when all of us take a moment to close our eyes and tune into the part of us that's really ultimately speaking from a place of fear, but is also preventing us from being our true selves. Do you have any questions on what I'm saying so far?
No, that definitely makes sense to me. I'm hearing you say that part of those voices, some of those voices protect us. They're my voices of anxiety. Is it going to work out? What's going to happen? Seems pretty normal. And yeah, I would say mostly I just picture those voices get to ride in the back seat, but I'm driving. My mother's voice is there too.
Right.
And sometimes I put them in the trunk.
Yeah.
But they're with me, and I'm probably not going to erase them.
Correct.
I just learn to manage them.
Yes.
Now sounds like you're going to say, what do you say back to them?
These voices are sneaky in that they'll do whatever they can to be in charge. Like you might get them into the back seat or into the trunk, and one's going to figure out how, like, there's a hole in the wheel well and like come around and then like poke their head into the window again. Right. Like that's
so scary.
So like,
yeah, I get it. You're right.
So for me, what came up was that, like my voices are often defensive. They can be anxious or they're doubting. And so my response to my voices was, I'm gonna bang on my chest. Yes, I am love. Yes, I am love. Now, very specifically, that's my mantra for my voices, right?
Your truth.
Right. You would have a different thing. Your voices would be saying something different to you, and thus your mantra in response to them would be different. So the idea is that for me, and this is that what like other people might, another example of a mantra was like, no, only love lives here. Right? Like, and so like something that's like, it's a response to a different type of voice. And what I feel like I'm doing right now is I am working to increase my capacity for love. I have a lot of love, and I know I'm capable of more. And what this particular ritual helped me see was that in order to increase my capacity for love, I had the ability to increase the capacity whenever I was uncomfortable, right? Because increasing the capacity of something, like stretching ourselves to like move to something that's like feels scary or like where fear is present, there's a feeling there that's uncomfortable. So what I'm choosing to do, and this is one of my takeaways, is to increase my capacity for that feeling of discomfort. And so what I was doing, and is that I have two examples of this, was when we were in Finland after we learned this, and I would go from the sauna to the lake, which was cold. That when I was in the cold part, which was like it's uncomfortable, like you're in a cold plunge, that I would do it there. And I would like be basically breathing through the discomfort of the cold plunge in my mind, saying, this is increasing my capacity for love. The more I can be comfortable with this discomfort. There was an art piece at Burning Man. There's always an art piece at Burning Man that's scary to climb. And I climbed it, and I like climbing them. And I got to the top, and I don't know how many, it was like a story and a half, maybe 2 stories tall. And it waved a little bit in the wind, so you could feel like the rocking back and forth. And while that was a little bit nerve-wracking, what was more nerve-wracking to me was that there was 2 people next to me who were drinking. And I was like, that makes me really nervous. And so while I was up there, I was like, yes, I'm love. Like, I am uncomfortable. How can I increase my capacity for this discomfort? And not try to control them. They're doing their own experience. Not try to stop it from waving and like rocking in the wind. For me, just being like, how can I increase my capacity for the discomfort that I'm in right now?
Question, how do you discern then when to increase your capacity for the discomfort and when to get the hell out of there? You were fine. You weren't in danger.
Right.
They were drinking. You weren't.
Right.
But when we're in an uncomfortable situation, some uncomfortable situations, we shouldn't be in.
Yeah.
So I've just said, this occurred to me like, oh, we need to address that so that we don't always want to increase our capacity.
I guess, I don't know that is coming up for me as like that discernment doesn't seem to be like a challenge. Like I feel like I know, I would know the difference between the things. Like, I guess here's both of these things I'm in choice on. I'm choosing to go into the cold plunge. I'm choosing to climb to the top of the tower.
Correct.
So I guess maybe that's, it's my choice to do it.
Yeah.
And
okay.
So
just to clarifying.
Yeah. I'm definitely, if I was driving, for example, with someone, I'm in the car with someone who's an unsafe driver, I would not be like, okay, let me increase my capacity to handle being in the car with an unsafe driver.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. And I think I'm talking maybe to listeners who are younger too. It's just like, okay, because they're approaching places where they're uncomfortable, and it's like, oh, how do you make sure that this seems pretty clear to me, right? Like you're in an unsafe situation, but when you're 14, you're trying to figure out what an unsafe.
But did I say unsafe?
No, but uncomfortable could be unsafe.
Okay, but so then let me distinguish those two things. I don't think even though I climbed to the top, I didn't feel like my safety was at risk, right? Like I was concerned about these other people,
right?
But it was, and ultimately while they were drinking, they weren't like being reckless. Like, I mean, like there may be if I had like felt like my safety or theirs inherently like was unsafe, but
Understood.
yeah, I think I do want to distinguish, because I think all of us do need to feel safe, want to feel safe, and need to find out how to feel safe. And I don't think life is comfortable all the time. So I am distinguishing between safety and comfort.
Yep. Perfect.
So in this way, Burning Man is completely safe and is uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
Someone else might come up an edge of unsafety there, but it's not about the discomfort of it.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
It's the idea of, if we're trying to get through life being like on the couch watching TV because that's what feels comfortable, then we're not increasing our capacity for anything. And so it's getting beyond the like, oh, I have to go outside. I have to like feel, and I have to feel sadness as well as grief, as well as joy, like increase the capacity for all of it.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before. I mean, I've experienced this too a lot with polyamory. I used to feel like as soon as I got uncomfortable, I was like, okay, well, I'm not doing this anymore. I got to get out of this. And because we live in a culture that really values comfort intensely and very quickly, like gratification, like I'm hot, get the AC on, right? Like I'm cold, give me a sweater. Like I'm hungry, give me a snack. So if I was hot or tired or annoyed, I would just exit the situation because I had the privilege. A lot of my life, I probably had the privilege to do that, right? I haven't been in some massive suffering condition. And I've learned that leaning into discomfort can actually, as you're saying, it's like it can actually elevate my life and lead me toward aha moments. But it's hard in the moment, like right now, post breakup, going through withdrawal, like I'm like incredibly uncomfortable. Want to fix it, must satiate. And I am so curious to see what is on the other side of that discomfort. So how long can you do that?
And I think we've spoken to this about polyamory, like when people have asked us, like, well, why did you choose it? You guys keep talking about why it's hard and whatever. And it's like, there is something to do it. Like, we are learning something by doing something that's hard.
Yeah, exactly. And if we hadn't been evolving and learned something and had all these breakthroughs and understandings of ourselves and other people, we wouldn't do it.
Right.
It would just be uncomfortable and we'd be like, let's stop doing this.
Right.
But things always come through on the other side. So, and that has really, I mean, aside from sitting in a cold plunge, which is like, an extreme thing in Finland, just a daily discomfort. It's like, okay, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm just going to sit with that for a while.
I'm going to like add this from a different angle. Is that Jamie Wheel, who I've mentioned before, is a, author and thought leader who speaks to, we have gotten to the point of thinking that comfort means we get tomatoes and watermelon and blueberries every day of the year, without acknowledging that they actually don't grow in certain cultures, that in certain climates they can around the world grow every day of the year, but that the expectation is that we're going to have them in our grocery store. And so it is uncomfortable to go to the grocery store and think, oh, there's no tomatoes here? What? And yet seasonality of food used to be how it always was. And so, and that's a way that we've become like entitled, and we're grasping onto like, this is how it should be, when the impact of 24/7 growing and all of that has huge impacts that we're not thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. This is just classic capitalism and partly living in this country. And that's part of why, going to Costa Rica was so great. It's like things were not at my fingertips. I did not have Amazon. The stores were not full of stuff. They were part empty. And that was just, part of what you had to live with. Another example you talk about here is eye gazing as being uncomfortable. And tell us a little bit about that.
actually, it is an example that can be uncomfortable for some people, but it's actually one of my takeaways from the Feminine Mysteries, which is that I discovered that I love to be seduced and to seduce by eye gazing. And it's a tantric practice. It can be very confronting for some people. It's very vulnerable. I remember reading years ago, Barbara Corrales in her book called Urban Tantra. She speaks to looking into someone's left eye to see their soul. And it's a practice that I have developed since reading her book, where because you can't look into both eyes when you're close up at the same time. So I always choose the left eye. Yeah.
Interesting.
And yeah, so it became very conscious for me when I was in Finland, the impact that eye gazing had on me, and the impact on others. And I got to practice it a lot at Burning Man. There is a camp called Rhythm Wave, which is a 5 rhythms dance camp. And so from 10 to noon, Monday through Saturday at Burning Man, you can go to this camp and dance for 2 hours. And they ask you not to wear sunglasses. And there's an actual proper bamboo, beautiful dance floor. You don't have shoes on. And you're just dancing in the crowd. And there's a whole arc to 5 rhythms that is taking you really through kind of an emotional and somatic journey of the body through dance and music. And I learned so much about myself on the dance floor. And eye gazing was a really potent practice where we would drop in. I would drop in for a dance or a part of a dance with someone through an eye gaze, and then say goodbye, move on to the next person. And then I learned, a couple of days later, I was at a different camp, and their live music was playing. And so I started looking into someone's eyes, and then I suddenly realized, oh, I did not set a container. And we basically had this deep eye gazing moment, and this person fell into me fell into love with me through this eye gazing. And I just felt the potency of it, and how I was I needed to, at the end of it, I kind of set the container this is if for someone who's not practiced in this, it can be confronting, or it can also be fulfill a deep longing.
Right. Yeah. And so what happened with that? Did you have to set a boundary, or?
Yeah, but which is fine. It was really beautiful. I just recognized that it was just a beautiful lesson for me of the potency of it. And so I just had to say, oh, here's where I'm at. And he was at a different place. And
wow, that is really fascinating too. Cause I think it is in the culture and the waters that you swim in, that I've swum in some, but less so, is that this is it's a very temporary, it's a seeing of someone. It's a moment or two, maybe a couple of minutes at the most. But it's temporary. And then you're moving on. Right. And there is something in me that's so future focused that I'm well, no, I just connected with that person. I'm going to talk to them again.
And on the dance floor, they actually speak to that. They're what happens on the dance floor stays on the dance floor. And it just, because you had this deep, soulful, out of body experience, that's not what's happening off the dance floor, that you have to create that again out there. And this, even though I've danced at this camp before, it was relatively new for me. I the depth of my experience and the learnings I had and the transcendence that I experienced on that dance floor was the first time for me at this burn that I had to then learn the lesson of off the dance floor, how do you navigate once you access this?
Interesting. And it's what happens at Dance Meets Tantra. I mean, they kind of encourage this type of movement. The eye gazing, I remember my therapist first said, I want you to do some eye gazing with your husband. And that was an assignment. And I was familiar with it at that point, and it freaked me out a bit because I had gone to this party in Boulder with my husband and all of his Hakomi homies, we would call them. So this Hakomi is a type of therapy, somatic therapy that he learned across a couple of years and all these trainings. And they were good eye gazers, right? So like we're sitting at the table at Shine in Boulder, and they would just like, look over, and I would look, and eventually I was like, nope, they can't do this anymore. And my eyes would just they would just hit the table. But it's completely uncomfortable. I mean, this is 10 years ago. Like, yeah, my daughter was a little bit little. But over time I have learned to do this, but get past the discomfort and like really sit in that. And it is a muscle that if you use, you can get stronger, but it's very intimidating at first. It's very vulnerable.
Yeah. And so I have now known in fact, I feel like it's almost like a superpower of mine that I need to learn how to like wield it. On the way back from Burning Man, I was like, oh, I have a visor on. Like, when do I lift my eyes and like hold the gaze of someone? Like, I have to become a little bit more discerning now, or set the container for it to hold it like appropriately. What's the word I want to say?
How would you set the container?
Like, it's fine to like if I'm like staring across the room and eye gazing at someone and don't ever plan to talk to them, then that's fine. Right. But in the, but just name it, just for me to say, oh, like I realize that like we're exchanging a lot of energy right now through the eye gaze. At the end of this, I'm going to suggest that we actually do a cord cutting and do an energetic clearing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So you also mentioned that they suggested you turn your phone off for the week in Finland at the mystery school. Did you do that? I mean, and how did it go? Obviously, you've been at retreats where you've turned off phones before. This isn't completely new, but...
Yeah, although what was new about it was that they did ask us to do it the entire time. Ista had asked us to do it for like 3 days at a time. This was the whole time. But what was interesting was what she also asked. I've also done Vipassana, which is no phone, no music, no journaling. So I have done it. But the intention here was to take a break from the written word. So not to read, not to look at our screens, obviously. And what it really invited me into, and I realized this afterwards, was like a deep presence. And really for me, the value of my iPhone, which was when I turned my phone back on, Touch had asked me, she's like, what are you missing? What's the thing you're most looking forward to when you go home? And I remember like looking at her almost blankly and being like, home? Like what? And then I was like, oh, I haven't thought of home at all. And now I don't have young kids at home. Like there's parts of the way I've set my life up that's relatively easier than other people's. But when I turned my phone on, it was like, oh, here's these emails. Oh, here's my dad. Here's Memphis. Oh, it was like, oh, right. These are people in my life that I've just not thought about because they are not present for me right now. And, oh, here's these things that I have to do. And in this regard, I realized that the iPhone was an incredible tool, that I should never get rid of my iPhone because it is the thing that actually connects me to my human life. And yet, it happened at Burning Man this week too, because I didn't have my phone for most of the time, is that when I don't have it with me, I have a very deep capacity to be extremely present.
Nice. You also said you stopped journaling.
I have stopped. I haven't been journaling much for several months now, actually, ever since Ista.
We're both on, that's so interesting. Yeah. Because you journaled a ton.
I journaled a ton. And then suddenly it was like, oh, I was using my journaling to process. And now I just feel like I have a lot less to process. And I'm just like allowing myself to feel what I need to feel. I don't know. Like I don't have my best way to describe it, but all I know is that the urge to journal has fallen away at the moment. I expect that it will come back, but it's not there now.
Same. Do you want to talk about taping your mouth shut? Because I want you to. Yeah,
I guess this is the other takeaway, another takeaway from Finland. So a lot of people I know, and so those of you who don't live in Colorado, or not, it has nothing to do with Colorado, but if you're not surrounded by people who are always trying to biohack, which is how to optimize your human existence, then you might not be familiar with a myriad of things. And one of the latest things that I've heard about is been to tape your mouth shut while you're sleeping. The idea being that breathing through your nose is better for you. You actually want to retain saliva in your mouth. And so keeping your mouth shut helps with that. And breathing through your nose can be more calming. And I've been following sleep hygiene. So I sleep with earplugs and an eye mask on every night, no matter where I'm at. And if you're listening right now and if you hear any banging, it's because there's construction happening. And so I also live in a home that often has construction happening. And so making sure that I am really protecting my sleep as much as possible. And so eye mask and earplugs have been a practice of mine now for several years. And then when I started doing the mouth taping, Touch was doing it. And so I was like, okay, I'm ready to try it, but I'm afraid the first night. It's like, I'm afraid, what's going to happen? What if I wake up gasping for air? If I stop breathing? And it turns out that I was afraid the first night, and but I was still breathing. I just had to breathe through my nose, and breathing through my nose really calmed me down. And I was like, okay, I'm just calming down, And so now I've been using mouth tape for most of the time since then. And I find there is a little bit of this habit that's forming of this in this ritual of okay, it's time. I'm going to sleep. I'm shutting I'm literally taping my mouth shut so there's no more talking.
Right.
And now it's just time to quiet down and go to sleep.
Beautiful.
And I look absolutely fucking ridiculous in case anyone wants to know.
You look like a kidnapping victim.
Yeah. Or a sleeping unicorn. Since I have my eye mask is a unicorn.
Oh, I see. A sleeping unicorn with a little tape on. You went to Finland. You went to a mystery school. You learned to seek the formless.
To let go of form.
To let go of form. Not seek the formless. I see. I was twisting it. To let go of form. You learned the value of not having your phone and not journaling.
I learned about the potency of eye gazing for me, as well as learned a mantra to tell myself when the voices inside my head are trying to, the fearful voices in my head are getting really loud.
And you learn even a greater level in the power of discomfort and how it can not only lead to personal growth, but increase your capacity for love. Wow.
And back to mystery school, right? If you spoke to anyone else at that retreat, no one else would have got any of that. Right. There's no curriculum that said this is the things you're going to learn. Right. And so that's an example of why any of these schools are so personal. They're personal experiences. And why I didn't go into any details about what the rituals looked like is that these were just my takeaways that I got from them. And these are just my takeaways. Mm-hmm. Someone else would absolutely have a different experience.
Yeah. And if you have any curiosity about Mary Magdalene and the 4 extra gospels in the Catholic religion, you might want to Google that. There will be some resources at the end in the show notes.
Yes, I know, or it's Megan Watterson and any of her books.
Work, yeah. And some Braveheart homework, I'd say, is why don't you think about how you can let go of form this week? What could you let go of form?
Or maybe start with, what is it you've got an idea of, and you know exactly what it looks like. And then it's that you need to let go of. You don't have to let go of the idea. I'm not letting go of wanting to fall through time and space with someone that I love. I'm letting go of what it looks like. And with that,
check us out on permissiontobehuman.live and follow us on Instagram. Love you guys.
Love you. Bye.
Do you need permission to be human? You got it. Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.